In the autumn of 1965, three men walked into a cemetery outside Pittsburgh carrying a Geiger counter with the permission to open a grave. The coffin they lifted out was not standard. It was expensively lined with lead. Somebody had paid for it deliberately 33 years earlier. When they opened it, the counter started screaming. The man inside had been dead since 1932. He was a millionaire. Steel money, a national golf title, a house full of trophies. And even in 1965, his bones were still burning.
To understand how this man poisoned himself with radiation of his own free will, let's go back in history. In 1898, Marie and Pierre Curie boiled down several tons of uranium waste and got 1/10 of a gram of something new. It glowed. Its own light. No flame, no fuel, no heat. The glow was the element coming apart. Atoms breaking open and throwing out energy. Gram for gram, radium is more than 1,000,000 times more radioactive than uranium. Pierre Curie taped a sample to his arm for 10 hours to see what it would do. It burned a wound that took months to close. The medical conclusion was correct. It destroys tissue, so point it at tissue you want destroyed. That is radiation therapy. It works, and it still saves lives. The public drew a different conclusion. Radium is energy. Energy is life, and if a little is medicine, more must be better.
It started in the bathroom. Radium toothpaste, radium soap, radium face cream. Then the kitchen, radium bread, radium butter, radium chocolate. Then it stopped making sense. There was a gold-plated card of radium worn under the scrotum overnight to restore vigor. The manufacturer recommended that in writing. And there was a crock that made your drinking water radioactive overnight. Families refilled it every night for years. So, how did anybody survive the 1920s? Almost none of it worked. Radium cost $120,000 a gram, thousands of times the price of gold. Nobody could afford to put real radium in face cream. So they put in a label, which gives this story its strangest fact. The fakes were the safe ones. The people who got hurt found the one company honest enough to deliver what it advertised. In East Orange, New Jersey, William Bailey made a tonic called Radithor. Distilled water, 2 isotopes of radium, a certified dose in every bottle. He called himself a doctor. He had dropped out of Harvard and had already been caught selling a fake cure. But he wasn't lying about what was in the bottle. Radithor did precisely what it promised. And in Pittsburgh, a millionaire with a sore arm was about to be handed his first case. It began with a train. In December 1927, Eben Byers was traveling home from the Harvard-Yale football game in a chartered car when he fell out of his berth and hurt his arm. It wasn't serious. It simply refused to stop aching. For a man who had won a national golf championship, an arm that wouldn't work properly was intolerable. He went to his doctor. His doctor recommended Radithor. What Byers was not told is that Bailey paid physicians a commission on every case they prescribed. He drank his first bottle in December 1927. He loved it. He said it gave him a toned-up feeling, more energy, better sleep. The arm improved. He went to 2 and 3 bottles a day, every day, and he did what enthusiastic rich men do. He told everyone. He sent cases to his friends. He sent cases to his business associates. He sent cases to women he was seeing. He gave it to his racehorses, and every bottle was doing the same thing.
Look, radium sits in the same column of the periodic table as calcium, and the human body cannot tell the two apart. Swallow radium and your body does what it does with calcium. It files it away in your bones. That is the entire problem. Radium decays by emitting alpha particles. Alpha particles cannot get through skin. Hold a sealed source in your hand and it will not reach you. But inside a bone, there is no skin and no sheet of paper. The particle travels a fraction of a millimeter and dumps everything into whatever is around it. It doesn't pass through. It isn't excreted. Radium has a half-life of about 1600 years, so on the scale of a human life, it does not decay away at all. It simply stays at point-blank range. The damage appears first where bone is thinnest and most active.
Byers drank Radithor for nearly 3 years and felt wonderful for 2 of them. There was no warning, no bad reaction, no early sickness, nothing to make him stop. The product delivered exactly the feeling it advertised right up until the bill came due. He stopped in late 1930 because he was losing weight, and his teeth had begun falling out. Then the headaches started. In 1931, the Federal Trade Commission finally opened an investigation into Radithor and sent a lawyer named Robert Wynn to take a statement from its most famous customer. Wynn traveled out to Byers' mansion on Long Island. What he wrote afterwards is one of the bleakest lines in American consumer history. A more gruesome experience in a more gorgeous setting would be hard to imagine. Byers was 51 years old. He was lying in a beautiful house, surrounded by his own trophies. And he could no longer speak clearly enough to give the statement they had come for. He died on the 31st of March, 1932. 9 years before Eben Byers drank his first bottle, in a factory in Orange, New Jersey, a young woman named Grace Fryer sat down at a workbench with a fine camel hair brush. The work was dial painting, watch faces, aircraft instruments, gun sights, anything a soldier needed to read in the dark. The paint was called Undark, and it contained radium. The brush had to hold a very fine point, and a fine point does not survive a whole dial. So the women were taught a technique. Put the brush between your lips, twist, dip, paint, then again, 200-300 dials a day. They were told the paint was harmless, and it was a pleasure to work with. The dust settled on everything, hair, hands, clothes, so that walking home in the evening they shimmered faintly in the dark. People in Orange called them the Ghost Girls. They painted their fingernails with it. Some painted their teeth before a night out, to smile at somebody in a dark room. In the same building, behind a partition, the company's chemists handled the same material with lead screens and tongs. Grace left the factory in 1920. 2 years later, her teeth began to loosen. When the dentist pulled them, the sockets would not heal, and the bone underneath came away in fragments. Others were further along. Jaws that crumbled under a doctor's fingers. Legs that shortened as the bone inside them collapsed. Dentists began calling it radium jaw. What was killing them was proved by a Newark medical examiner named Harrison Martland.
Radium does not simply sit in bone, it decays. And the first thing it decays into is radon, which is a gas. A gas can move. It works its way out of the bone into the bloodstream. It travels to the lungs and leaves the body the way any gas does, on the breath, which gave Martland something he could measure. He had the women breathe into a sealed container and put an instrument to it. Their breath was radioactive. It was one of the first times anyone had measured radium inside a living human body.
The company had known for years. It had commissioned its own studies and buried them. When the deaths reached the newspapers, United States Radium offered an explanation. The women had syphilis. Grace Fryer died in 1933. She was 34. Radithor did not outlive its most famous customer. The Federal Trade Commission ordered Bailey to stop selling it. He stopped and then spent the rest of his life insisting the product was safe and that something else had killed Byers. He told anyone who asked that he had drunk more radium water than any man alive. The law moved slowly. In 1938, Congress passed the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which for the first time required a manufacturer to show a product was safe before selling it. Byers is usually counted among the deaths that got it there. That ended the tonics. It did not end the paint. Radium dials were still being made in American factories into the 1960s. Marie Curie died in 1934 of a blood disease almost certainly caused by 40 years of handling the element she found. Her laboratory notebooks are still radioactive. They are kept in Paris in lead-lined boxes. And if you want to read them, you sign a waiver first.
Radium has a half-life of about 1600 years. A half-life is not a shelf life. It is the time it takes for half of it to decay, and then half of what remains, and half of that again. 1600 years from now, half the radium in Grace Fryer's bones will still be there, still emitting. Nothing speeds that up. There is no treatment, no chemistry, no depth of burial that makes any difference. It cannot be neutralized, only waited out, which is why the coffins were lined with lead, not to protect the dead, to protect the living.
In 1965, a team from a government laboratory began locating the bodies. They were studying what radium does to a human skeleton across decades, and the only way to do that was to go and collect the skeletons. Families were written to and asked for permission. A great many said yes. That is what the men in the Pittsburgh cemetery were doing with a Geiger counter and a permit 33 years after Eben Byers was buried in lead. He was still, in the language of the report, highly radioactive. William Bailey died in 1949 of bladder cancer. In 1969, they dug him up as well. He had been telling the truth about one thing. He had drunk more radium water than almost any man alive, and his bones proved it. Grace Fryer has been dead for more than 90 years. She has 15 centuries to go.